The case that ended my career was not a murder. It was a missing man I thought I understood. And my mistake cost him his life. His name was Thomas Ashworth. 61 years old. A retired accountant with a small garden and a wife who loved him deeply. He vanished on a Tuesday morning in November. His wife Eleanor called me because the police had given up. She told me something strange on that first phone call. Something I should have paid attention to. Something that would haunt me for years to come. Thomas had been receiving letters. Handwritten. No return address. And after reading them, he would stand at the window for hours, watching the mist roll in from the coast. I dismissed this detail. That was my first mistake. But it would not be my last. Let me take you back to that November morning. I want you to see it the way I saw it. Feel what I felt before everything unraveled. The mist was thick as wool that day. Soft as regret. It hung over the city like a secret waiting to be told. I stood at my window with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, watching the world disappear into gray. I was 54 years old. Still working. Still believing I was the best at what I did. 43 years of solving puzzles had made me confident. Perhaps too confident. That belief would soon be shattered in ways I never expected. My phone rang at 8:30. Eleanor Ashworth's voice trembled like a bird caught in a storm. 3 days, she said. Her husband had been gone for 3 days without a single word. The police had been kind but useless. They told her grown men leave sometimes. Perhaps he needed space. Perhaps he would come back when he was ready. But Eleanor knew her husband. 31 years of marriage had taught her things that cannot be written in police reports. She knew the rhythm of his breath. The weight of his silences. The way he hummed while making breakfast. The way he always kissed her forehead before leaving a room. This was not a man who needed space. This was a man who had been swallowed by something she could not name. 2 hours later, Eleanor sat in my office. Her hands would not stop shaking. She kept touching her wedding ring, turning it around and around her finger like a prayer. I offered her tea. She accepted but never drank it. Tell me about your husband, I said. And she did. Thomas was quiet, she told me. Steady. The kind of man who showed love through small daily acts rather than grand gestures. He was not flashy or romantic in obvious ways. But he was devoted in ways that mattered more. Every single morning for 31 years, Thomas made Eleanor tea. The same blend. The same cup. The same gentle way he set it on her bedside table while she was still swimming up from sleep. Can you imagine that kind of devotion? That kind of constancy? I could not. Not then. My own life had been a series of hotel rooms and temporary arrangements. Relationships that began with intensity and faded when work called me elsewhere. I told myself this was the price of excellence. That greatness required sacrifice. But sitting in that room with Eleanor, watching her hands shake, I felt the first small crack in that story. Here is where I need to tell you something important. I took the case because finding lost things was my gift. Or so I believed. Every solved mystery made me feel like I mattered. Like my existence had weight and meaning in a world that often felt indifferent. What I did not understand then was the dangerous game I was playing. I was using other people's problems to avoid my own. Every hour spent on someone else's crisis was an hour I did not have to sit with my own questions. Who was I beyond the work? What did I want from this life? Had I chosen this path, or had I stumbled onto it and been too afraid to step off? These were whispers I drowned out with busyness. With importance. With the satisfying click of puzzle pieces sliding into place. But those whispers would grow louder. Much louder. The investigation began the way they always did. I interviewed neighbors first. Then traced financial records. Then reconstructed the ordinary pattern of Thomas Ashworth's days. He woke at 6:30 every morning. Made tea. Read the newspaper. Worked in his garden until lunch. Spent afternoons in his leather chair with history books. Cooked dinner with Eleanor. Watched television. Went to bed by 10. A simple life. A predictable life. The kind of life that does not usually produce mysteries. But there were small details that did not quite fit. The neighbors mentioned that Thomas had seemed distracted lately. Lost in thought. One neighbor said she had waved to him 3 times last week and he had not noticed her at all. His daughter mentioned that he had cancelled their last 2 Sunday dinners. He never cancelled Sunday dinners. And then there were the letters. Eleanor brought them up again when I pressed her for anything unusual. Handwritten envelopes arriving every few weeks for the past several months. No return address. Thomas told her they were from an old colleague. Boring correspondence about pension matters. But Eleanor had noticed something. After reading these letters, Thomas changed. Not dramatically. Not in ways a stranger would notice. But she noticed. He would grow quiet in a different way. Not his usual peaceful silence, but something heavier. Something that felt like weight. He would stand at the window for long stretches. Watching the mist when it came. As if waiting for something to emerge from its depths. I wrote this down in my notebook. And then I made my second mistake. I moved on. The letters seemed peripheral. The finances showed no irregularities. There was no evidence of another woman. No secret debts. No hidden vices. No gambling. No suspicious phone calls. Thomas Ashworth appeared to be exactly what his wife believed him to be. A good man living a simple life. So I constructed a theory. This is what detectives do. We take scattered pieces and arrange them into stories that make sense. I decided that Thomas had suffered some kind of quiet breakdown. The weight of retirement had finally caught up with him. Some men spend their whole lives running from themselves. And when the work stops, they suddenly have nowhere left to hide. I had seen it before. Many times. The successful businessman who walks into the ocean one morning. The devoted father who boards a train to a city where no one knows his name. The retired executive who checks into a hotel and never checks out. Men who seemed fine until they were not. Men whose inner worlds were mysteries even to those who loved them most. I told Eleanor my theory. I told her that Thomas had likely experienced a psychological crisis. That he had probably gone somewhere to think. To breathe. To find himself again. I told her to wait. To be patient. I told her that men like Thomas usually came home once the storm in their minds had passed. She looked at me with eyes full of desperate hope. She wanted to believe me. She needed to believe me. So she did. I closed the case after 2 weeks. Unsolved officially, but in my mind I had solved it. I had explained it to my own satisfaction, and that was enough. There were other puzzles waiting. Other people who needed my particular gifts. The world was full of mysteries, and I was the man who solved them. I moved on. I always moved on. That was how I survived. But here is what I did not know. Those letters Eleanor mentioned. The ones Thomas read before staring into the mist. The ones I dismissed as unimportant. They were not from an old colleague. They were from a ghost. A ghost Thomas had been running from for over 40 years. And that ghost had finally found him. 6 months passed. I worked other cases. Found other missing persons. Exposed other lies. My reputation continued to grow. My confidence remained unshaken. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was Eleanor. Her voice was different now. Hollow. Empty. Like someone had scooped out everything soft inside her and left only the shell. They found him, she said. Thomas Ashworth's body had been discovered in a small cottage on the Welsh coast. He had rented it under a false name. Paid in cash. Told no one where he was going. Natural causes, the coroner said. His heart had simply stopped. He had been dead for nearly 5 months. 5 months while I worked other cases. 5 months while I congratulated myself on another puzzle explained. 5 months while Eleanor waited by the window, hoping her husband would walk through the door. He never did. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what they found in that cottage. Stacks of letters. Neatly bundled. Dozens of them. And a journal, its pages filled with a handwriting that grew shakier as the entries progressed. Thomas Ashworth had been writing a confession. A story he had carried alone for over 40 years. The police shared the contents with Eleanor. And Eleanor shared them with me. I wish she had not. But I understand why she did. She needed someone else to carry this weight. Even just a small piece of it. When Thomas was 19 years old, he worked at a factory on the outskirts of Manchester. It was a summer job. A way to earn money before university. He was young and careless and believed himself invincible the way all young people do. There was a boy named William who worked alongside him. They were not friends exactly, but they were friendly. They ate lunch together sometimes. Talked about football and girls and dreams. William wanted to be a surgeon. He talked about it constantly. His hands were steady and precise, and he was saving every penny for medical school. This was his destiny, he said. He had known it since he was 8 years old. One afternoon in August, Thomas made a mistake. He was tired. Distracted. Thinking about a girl he had met the weekend before. He failed to follow a safety procedure. A simple thing. A small thing. There was an accident. Machinery that should have been locked engaged without warning. William's right arm was caught. The damage was catastrophic. William lost the use of his right arm. His dominant hand. His surgeon's hand. His future. Everything he had dreamed of since childhood, gone in an instant. And here is the part that Thomas could never forgive. The investigation blamed William. They said he had been careless. That he had failed to follow proper procedures. That the accident was his own fault. Thomas knew the truth. He knew it was his mistake, his carelessness, his distraction that had caused the accident. But he said nothing. He was 19 and terrified. He told himself that speaking up would destroy his own life without giving William anything back. The damage was done. The arm was gone. What good would honesty do now? So he buried it. He left the factory at the end of summer. Went to university. Met Eleanor. Built a quiet, good life filled with tea and gardens and history books. He never spoke of William again. Not to anyone. But he never forgot. The journal entries made that clear. Thomas had thought about William almost every day for 40 years. He had followed his story from a distance. Learned that William had become an accountant instead of a surgeon. Married. Had children. Built a life despite everything. Thomas told himself this was enough. William had survived. William was okay. But Thomas was not okay. The guilt lived inside him like a second heartbeat. It colored everything. It was why he devoted himself so completely to small acts of kindness. Why he made tea for Eleanor every morning without fail. Why he kept his promises, always, without exception. He was trying to earn forgiveness he could never ask for. And then the letters started coming. William had found him. After 40 years, William had finally tracked down the man who had ruined his life and then disappeared into comfortable anonymity. The letters were not threats. They were not demands for money or revenge. They were worse than that. They were questions. Why did you never say anything? Did you ever think about me? Do you know what I lost that day? Do you understand what I could have been? Thomas had no answers he could bear to speak. Every response he drafted felt hollow. Excuses. Justifications. Desperate attempts to explain the unexplainable. So he ran. He found a cottage by the sea where no one knew his name. He sat with his guilt and his letters and his journal. He wrote and wrote, trying to find words that might make sense of what he had done. But there were no such words. And eventually, his heart gave out. Not from disease. Not from age. From the sheer weight of carrying something that was never meant to be carried alone. When I finished reading the journal, I sat in silence for a long time. The mist had rolled in again outside my window. Thick and gray and full of ghosts. I understood something then that I had never understood before. I had missed it. All of it. The letters. The change in his silence. The way he watched the mist like he was waiting for something to emerge from its depths. I had seen these details and explained them away. They did not fit the story I wanted to tell. They complicated my neat theory. So I ignored them. I was so certain of my own perception. So confident in my ability to see what others missed. So proud of my 43 years of experience. And that pride had blinded me. Thomas Ashworth died alone in a cottage by the sea because I was too arrogant to admit I might be wrong. Eleanor did not blame me when she shared the journal. That was almost worse than if she had. She thanked me for trying. She said I had done my best with the information I had. But I knew the truth. My best had not been good enough. My arrogance had cost a man his life. That case did not officially end my career. I continued working for another 8 years. I solved dozens of other puzzles. My reputation remained intact. But something fundamental had shifted inside me. Every time I closed a case, I wondered what I had missed. Every confident conclusion felt like a house built on sand. Every moment of certainty was followed by a whisper of doubt. What if I was wrong again? What if my blindness was costing someone else their life right now? I began to see my entire history differently. All those years of certainty. Believing I was the smartest person in every room. What had I missed in my own story? What obvious truths had I ignored because they did not fit my preferred narrative? I thought about the relationships I had let wither. The friends I had neglected. The family gatherings I had skipped because work seemed more important. My sister had stopped inviting me to holidays years ago. Not out of anger, but out of resignation. She knew I would not come. My father had died while I was working a case in another city. I made it to the funeral, but I had not made it to his bedside. I had not held his hand at the end. I told myself these sacrifices were necessary. That I was building something meaningful. That my work mattered more than ordinary human connections. But what had I actually built? A reputation. A collection of solved cases that would be forgotten within a generation. A life that looked impressive from the outside but felt hollow in the quiet hours of the night. Thomas Ashworth had spent 40 years running from his guilt. And I had spent 40 years running from my emptiness. We were not so different after all. I retired at 62. Not because I had found peace. Because I could no longer trust myself. The first year was brutal. I had defined myself by my work for so long that I did not know who I was without it. I would wake in the morning with that familiar surge of purpose. Ready to analyze. Investigate. Solve. Then I would remember. There was nothing to solve. Just empty hours stretching out before me like a mist-covered road with no destination. I drank too much that year. Not dramatically. Not in a way that anyone would notice from outside. But I reached for the bottle earlier and earlier each evening. Trying to blur the edges of questions I could not answer. Who am I now? What was any of it for? Did my life actually matter? And underneath all of that, the question that hurt the most. Could I have saved Thomas Ashworth if I had been less arrogant? Less certain? Less invested in being the brilliant detective who always knew best? I carried that guilt like a stone in my chest. Heavy and cold and constant. It sat there with every breath, reminding me of what I had done. What I had failed to do. I began to understand, perhaps for the first time, what Thomas must have felt all those years. The weight of a mistake that cannot be unmade. The terrible loneliness of carrying something you cannot speak about. The way guilt colors everything, turns every joy slightly bitter, makes every peaceful moment feel stolen. His story became a mirror for my own. We had both been so invested in maintaining an image of ourselves as good, competent people that we could not face the evidence of our failures. Thomas buried his guilt until it killed him. I was well on my way to doing the same. The turning point came from an unexpected direction. A letter arrived one morning. Handwritten envelope. No return address. My heart stopped for a moment. Was this what Thomas had felt when William's letters began arriving? Was my own ghost finally coming to find me? But the letter was not an accusation. It was an invitation. A woman named Margaret Chen was organizing a conference for retired investigators. A gathering where experienced professionals could share wisdom with younger people entering the field. She had heard of my work. She wondered if I might speak about the importance of humility in investigation. I almost threw the letter away. Humility was exactly what I lacked. It was my absence of humility that had led to Thomas Ashworth's death. What could I possibly teach anyone about a virtue I had never possessed? But something made me pause. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the small, desperate hope that if I could name my failure publicly, it might lose some of its power over me. I wrote back and said yes. The conference was held in a small university town in October. The kind of place where autumn leaves collect in doorways and the smell of wood smoke hangs in the evening air. The kind of place that feels suspended in time. I prepared my talk for weeks. Writing and rewriting. Trying to find words for something I had never spoken aloud. I had planned to discuss technique. Methodology. The proper approach to investigation. Safe topics. Professional topics. But when I stood before that room of 50 people, something changed. I looked at the young faces eager to learn. The older faces marked by their own accumulated wisdom and regret. And I realized that technique was not what they needed from me. They needed truth. So I told them about Thomas Ashworth. I told them about my confidence and my blindness. About the letters I dismissed and the silence I misread. About the man who died alone in a coastal cottage because I was too proud to admit I might be missing something. I told them that the greatest danger in our work was not incompetence but certainty. That the moment we believe we see everything clearly is the moment we stop looking. That humility is not weakness but wisdom. My voice shook as I spoke. My hands trembled the way Eleanor's had trembled in my office all those years ago. When I finished, the room was silent. I thought I had made a terrible mistake. That I had exposed myself as a fraud and everyone now saw me as I truly was. A broken old man who had wasted his life on a false image of himself. Then someone began to clap. And then another. Within moments, the whole room was applauding. Not because I had given a brilliant speech, but because I had given an honest one. I had shown them my wounds, and in doing so, I had given them permission to acknowledge their own. After the talk, a young woman approached me. She could not have been more than 25. Serious eyes. Nervous energy that reminded me of myself at that age. Her name was Sophie. She had just started working as an investigator. And she was terrified. Terrified of making mistakes. Terrified of missing something important. Terrified of failing the people who trusted her. I looked at her and saw all the years stretching out before her. All the cases she would work. The puzzles she would solve. The inevitable failures she would face. And I said something I wish someone had said to me 40 years earlier. I told her that she would make mistakes. That was not a possibility but a certainty. She would miss things. Misjudge situations. Let people down despite her best intentions. The question was not whether she would fail. The question was what she would do with failure when it came. She could let it harden her. Make her defensive and brittle and afraid to take risks. Or she could let it soften her. Teach her compassion for herself and others. Remind her that everyone is doing their best with limited information, and sometimes our best is not enough. I told her that the clients who haunt us are gifts. As painful as that sounds. They are the teachers who show us where we need to grow. Thomas Ashworth taught me more about humility and human frailty than all my successful cases combined. His death was a tragedy. But the lesson it offered was a kind of grace. Sophie listened with those serious eyes. When I finished, she thanked me. Not politely, but with real warmth. She said she had been afraid that becoming an investigator meant becoming someone hard and certain and closed off. She was relieved to learn it could mean something else. That conversation planted a seed in me. Over the following years, I began to speak more. I wrote articles about the psychology of investigation. About confirmation bias and epistemic humility. About the dangers of certainty. I mentored young investigators who reminded me of my younger self. All that eager confidence. All that desperate need to prove themselves. And I tried to help them see what I had not been able to see. In a strange way, my failure became my greatest contribution. All those years of successful cases had built my reputation. But the case I got wrong taught me something I could actually share. Something that might help others avoid the traps I had fallen into. This is what I have come to understand about forgiveness. It is not a moment but a practice. It is not something you achieve once and possess forever. It is something you do again and again. Every day. Sometimes every hour. I have forgiven myself for Thomas Ashworth more times than I can count. The guilt still rises sometimes. Unexpected and sharp. Usually in the quiet moments when I have nothing to distract me from my own thoughts. A certain quality of mist. A handwritten envelope. The smell of tea brewing in the morning. And each time, I have to make the choice again. Do I let this guilt crush me? Or do I acknowledge it, honor the pain it represents, and then gently set it aside so I can continue doing whatever good I can? Forgiveness is not about forgetting. It is not about pretending the past did not happen. It is about choosing to stop punishing yourself for being human. I think of Thomas often. I think of him sitting in that cottage by the sea. Surrounded by letters he could not answer. Drowning in a guilt he could not resolve. I feel such tenderness for him now. Such compassion. For the frightened 19-year-old who made a terrible choice. For the older man who spent 40 years trying to outrun it. He was not a villain. He was a human being who made a mistake and then devoted his life to quiet acts of kindness, trying to earn forgiveness he could not ask for. That is not wickedness. That is tragedy. I wish he had been able to face William. To say the words he could not write. To sit across from the man he had wronged and simply say, "I am sorry. I was afraid. I have regretted it every day of my life." I wish he had known that the things we cannot forgive ourselves for are often the things others have long since released. William's letters were not seeking revenge. I read them, later, when Eleanor shared everything with me. They were seeking understanding. Connection. Acknowledgement. William had built a life. Not the life he dreamed of, but a good life nonetheless. He had made peace with what happened decades ago. He was not looking to destroy Thomas. He just wanted to be seen. To be acknowledged. To hear Thomas say, "Yes, it happened. Yes, it was my fault. Yes, I remember you." But Thomas could not see that. His guilt had grown so large it blocked out everything else. He could not imagine forgiveness was possible because he could not imagine forgiving himself. I understand that trap. I lived in it for years. The difference is that I had people who pulled me out. Margaret with her invitation. Sophie with her questions. The colleagues who heard my confession and responded not with judgment but with recognition. We need each other. Not just for company, but for perspective. The stories we tell ourselves about our own failures are almost always worse than the truth. We need other voices to remind us that we are not monsters. Just humans doing our imperfect best in an imperfect world. I am 71 years old now. The mist still rolls in from the coast some mornings. And when it does, I think of Thomas. I think of Eleanor, who passed away 2 years ago, still keeping a photo of her husband on her bedside table despite everything she learned. I think of William, and wonder what became of him. And I think of all the cases I solved over those 43 years. The families reunited. The truths uncovered. The small justices achieved. They mattered too. That is something I have learned to hold alongside my failure. The good I did was real. Even if it was not perfect. Even if it existed alongside blindness and arrogance and all my other flaws. We are all mixtures of light and shadow. The goal is not to eliminate the shadow. The goal is to acknowledge it. To know our weaknesses so they cannot ambush us. So let me leave you with this question. What is the one thing you have been afraid to forgive yourself for? Not the small embarrassments. Not the awkward moments that make you cringe when you remember them. The real thing. The one sitting in the quiet corner of your heart, waiting. The one you have pushed down so many times you almost believe it is gone. Until some unexpected moment brings it rushing back. We all carry something. That is part of being human. Part of having lived long enough to make choices we cannot unmake. But here is what I have learned. The stone does not protect you. Carrying your guilt is not penance. Suffering is not the price of redemption. You made a mistake. Perhaps a serious one. Perhaps one that hurt someone you loved. And you have carried the weight ever since. But you have also learned. Grown. Changed. The very fact that you still feel it proves you have taken the lesson to heart. You are not the same person who made that choice. So maybe it is time to set the stone down. Not throw it away. Not pretend it never existed. Just set it down gently. Like something precious that has become too heavy to carry. You can pick it up again if you need to. But perhaps you will find that you do not need to. Thomas Ashworth walked into the mist and never came back. But his story did. And in the telling of it, something has been healed. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough. Enough to go on. Enough to hope. The mist will lift. It always does. The morning will come. Another chance to walk a little further down the path. Carrying a little less than before. I am grateful you spent this time with me. In the telling of this story, something in me has settled a little deeper. Perhaps the same is true for you. If these words have found you at the right moment, if they have touched something that needed touching, then I am glad. That is all any storyteller can hope for. Not to change the world, but to reach one person in one moment and offer them something they needed to hear. And if you ever need this feeling again, this gentle space where regret softens into wisdom, come back. There will always be another story waiting. Another voice in the quiet hours. Another invitation to lay down your burdens and rest. We share our struggles so others feel less alone. We speak our truths so others find courage to face their own. You are not alone in what you carry. You never have been. Sleep well tonight, my friend. Be kind to yourself. As kind as you would be to a dear friend who came to you with the same burdens. You deserve that kindness. You always have. Good night. Come back soon. The stories will be here. And so will I. Always.